You have seen my thoughts, my preview, my prediction on the Big Ten championship game. Now it's time to take a look at how insiders on each side of this thing are feeling. We're going to be talking to Justin Hopkins from Scoop Duck, a part of the On3 Network, and Marty Leap at Happy Valley Insider, a part of the Rivals Network, to see how the Nittany Lions and the Ducks are feeling going into the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis.
From LA to Piscataway. All Big Ten, all year long. This is Big Ten 10.
Number 1 versus number 3. This one is going to go down Saturday night. We are so close to determining the first Big Ten champion of the 18-team divisionless Big Ten era. We're going to start out on the West Coast. We're going to start with that team out west, and we welcome in our buddy Justin Hopkins, publisher over there at Scoop Duck, a part of the On3 Network. J-Hop, it's always great to talk to you here on the program. Now, kind of like we'll get into it, but with Marty a little bit later, I want to start first with just, instead of the matchups, we want to start first with just the team, just the Oregon Ducks. Right now, they're getting healthier. We saw Tez Johnson come back. We saw Jordan Burch, who's kind of been in and out of the lineup with injuries this season. We saw him come back in that Washington game, look pretty good, along with the rest of the defensive line, which we'll talk about here in just a minute. But this team appears to be getting healthier. They appear to be playing at the top of their game, certainly right now. Can this team fly even higher than they are right now, or just how well are they playing as a group at this point in the season?
Yeah, that's a great question for this week and 2 weeks ago, because obviously, we saw Oregon's last game prior to Washington was Wisconsin, and they were running on fumes, right? It looked like they were limping on into what was a bye week for them, after that Wisconsin game. Really tight finish, really tight win. So that was kind of a story, at least for us on this side, like, okay, what Oregon's team will we see against Washington this week coming out of the bye? Were they actually dinged up, or were they not playing good football, right? They looked really good against Washington, and that really looked like it refreshed them and made the offensive line and defensive line just kind of put that pep back in their step. So I believe, and I think we'll see the version of that team against Penn State this week. Obviously, it'll be just the second game in a row coming out of that bye. So looks like they're playing pretty good football. Like you said, they're overall pretty healthy. I think Marcus Harper, the starting guard, is the only one we might not see out there this coming week. And so if you got Jordan Burch back and you got Tez Johnson back, it looks like you're in pretty good shape, ready to play your best football at the time you need to most.
I was just going to ask about Marcus Harper, but thanks for putting that in there. He's kind of been out, but they've been pretty good kind of filling the gap that he's kind of left behind in there at guard. All right, let's talk about some of these matchups. Marcus Harper, a part of that really good offensive line, a Joe Moore Award finalist. They're going to have their hands full with some of the best pass rushers, certainly in the Big Ten, if not all of college football. Abdul Carter and Dennis Sutton have been tough to block, certainly, throughout this season. But Oregon, they got a pretty good tackle combination as well with Josh Connerly on one side and a Johnny Cornelius certainly on the other side. Do you think that those tackles, this offensive line, is going to be able to keep this pass rush at bay? Is Will Stein going to do anything that maybe a little bit different to get rid of the football quickly? How do you see kind of that matchup certainly playing out?
Yeah, and Oregon already kind of gets rid of the football fairly quick most plays, so that helps Oregon a little bit. I think what helps Oregon more than anything, because Abdul Carter's a total stud, right? I mean, that's a guy that Oregon fans know immediately because he's probably a first rounder. So, there's a guy that I know everybody's tried to scheme away from all season long. I assume Oregon will do the same. I would if I was coach. I think what makes it or helps it for Oregon is the fact that, Dylan Gabriel doesn't have a ton of rush yards, but his escapability is really good, right? He does a really good job of just moving around very nonchalantly in the pocket when there's a big pass rush. So if the offensive line can create those pockets that he's tend to kind of run up into with a big pass rush, that's going to be the key of the game for me. So, that's the game within the game. Obviously, if you're James Franklin, you want your guys pinning the ears back and getting after the quarterback. For Oregon, it's like, okay, which way are they coming and how can we create a pocket for Dylan Gabriel? They'll be able to throw the ball. They do a lot of screens. They do a lot of short passing routes. So in terms of that, I think Oregon should be okay, but he's a really good player, so you never know.
We're certainly on the same wavelength there. I talked about that in my preview, how I think, that Dylan Gabriel can kind of slither away, get outside of the pocket, whether he run, whether he throws. He can certainly kind of move things away from the pass rush. Now, let's talk about it from the other standpoint. Oregon's defensive line is just an absolute machine right now. They've been getting they've been wreaking havoc as good as any team in college football, coming off a 10-sack performance against the Washington Huskies. You look at Penn State's, they're missing Anthony Donkow, who's a redshirt freshman offensive tackle who's been really good for them this season. And then you plug in Nolan Rucci. You look at Mateo on one side. You look at Jordan. You look at Tatum Tuioti. You look at the guys in the middle, like even coming from the linebacker position on some of these pressures. How good do you feel about this Oregon defense matching up and getting pressure on Drew Aller? Because we've seen it with Penn State. When Drew Aller kind of gets heat around him, this Penn State offense maybe takes a little bit, a couple of rungs down the ladder, so to speak. And I kind of look at this and I say, hey, look at that secondary back there, all those seniors back there for Oregon. Penn State has kind of had trouble separating. Look at that Ohio State game. It seems to me that they can man up on the outside against these receivers, and this defensive line can get a lot of pressure. How do you kind of see that side going down?
Yeah, I would have said the exact same thing. I see it that way, and I imagine that James Franklin and Drew Aller probably woke up in a sweat or two kind of looking at this defensive line, the way they create pressure, the way they stop the run, right? I know if I was James Franklin, I'd say, hey, we want to establish the run a little bit here. We don't need huge yards. We need 4 or 5 yards on first down, set up second and third manageable, and let's stay in this football game and keep possession of the football. If I was Penn State, that's what I'd do. The problem is Oregon's really good at stopping all of that. So, that's kind of the matchup within the game. I did a podcast earlier this week, was talking about it. I'm like, man, this is a really tough matchup for Penn State. And I think that's a big part of it because, like you said, Oregon's secondary is going to be good enough to probably play man and run with Penn State's wide receivers. Really, it's going to come down to how much or how many times can Drew Aller lean on Tyler Warren and get him the football, because that's obviously their top guy that they're going to pass the ball to, and Oregon's linebackers are going to have to account for him, possibly a safety. So that's probably where I see Penn State leaning a lot. And again, running the football against Oregon is really, really tough to do.
It is. And J-Hop clearly read the show notes, because now we're going to talk about Tyler Warren here right now. He is an absolute weapon running the football, catching the football. He's thrown it even a couple of times. They line him up out wide. They line him up in the slot, typical tight end position. Like, he is all over the field. Andy Kotelnicki, very creative in his formations and in his motions. What specific challenges, when you look at what Oregon has personnel-wise on defense, what specific challenges does Tyler Warren present the Ducks defense?
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's a terrific player. And if I would say that there's a weakness in Oregon's defense, or maybe the biggest weakness, it's in the middle of the football field, right? So that's, I think, where you'll see Tyler Warren probably live in this football game. And again, they don't need him to get 15, 30 yards. They don't need that from him. They need 5, 6, 7 yards, be able to stay in front of the chains, second and third and short. So if I was Penn State, if I was James Franklin, that's what I would do to get my best offensive weapon out there in space. Oregon's linebackers are not bad at all. They're very good. Bryce Betcher's been really good. Jeff Bassa's been really good. They just don't cover all that well. So that's the matchup I see that Penn State could probably really exploit. And I would guess that, I'm sure Dan Lanning's got Tyler Warren circled, but he's that good that you're going to have to account for him. I could see him having a 10, 12 catch day for 110 yards, and every one of them being valuable to Penn State.
And I think Penn State's going to need him to have that kind of day. Maybe not quite that USC performance. That was absolutely crazy at the beginning of the year. But certainly a fantastic performance is needed, I think, for Tyler Warren. Last thing, we'll get you out of here on this. What would it mean, year one, walking right straight into the Big Ten and grabbing that title in Indianapolis? What would that mean here for Dan Lanning and this Ducks team?
Obviously, it's a big story, right? You've got people nationally talking about it. We're talking about it. I mean, that's a pretty big thing, and it's ironic to think that the biggest question, or everybody said Oregon wouldn't be physical enough, or would they be physical enough for the Big Ten? And it's pretty clear they're set on both sides of the line of scrimmage, which is where that battle's won. So it would be huge. The 12-0 was a big thing for Oregon fans to be able to celebrate that. Obviously, being in this Big Ten championship game is great for Oregon fans. And I don't know. I think it would definitely be a really big story in college football to just say, hey, look at the new guys over here in this conference. And ironically enough, I look at this is a pivot, but look at Arizona State going to the Big 12, and they're competing for. I mean, like the old Pac-12 apparently wasn't that bad of football, but here we are, and it would be quite an honor for Duck fans for sure.
Absolutely, they have looked fantastic this season. But we know once you get past, it's all about the college football playoff, making that run to potentially the first national championship in school history for the Oregon Ducks. Justin Hopkins, publisher at Scoop Duck at On 3. Always great to talk to you. Have fun. It should be a good one this weekend.
Yeah, thank you, brother.
We've taken a look at the Oregon Ducks. Now it's time to take a look from that team out west to the team out east, that being the Penn State Nittany Lions, making their first Big Ten championship game appearance since 2016 when they were able to take home the title 38-31 over the Wisconsin Badgers. They're trying to replicate that same result, and we got an insider's outlook and an insider's view on the blue and right now, and we welcome in Marty Leap from Happy Valley Insider to talk about everything. He joins us from the Rivals Network. Of course, now, Marty, I'm going to start with you, the same place that I really started with Justin, and that's talking about the team specifically before I get into the matchups with the opponents. Now, when you take a look at Penn State, of course, they had that game against the Ohio State Buckeyes. They fall short once again, but since then, they've rattled off 4 consecutive victories. You look at teams like Washington, you look at Purdue, you look at Minnesota. That was a close game. You look at Maryland to finish the season. Now, we mentioned that close game against the Gophers, but every other game has been a really tight matchup. Or I should say, Minnesota was the tight matchup. Every other game has been an impressive victory for the Penn State Nittany Lions. It's all about playing your best when you go into the postseason. Are you playing your best football when you get into the month of December and as we get into January? Do you believe Penn State is riding that wave right now and playing their best football approaching this game in Indianapolis?
Yeah, I think they're playing really well right now. One issue they've had a lot in past years is letting the Ohio State loss snowball into multiple losses. This is the first season of the James Franklin era where they've finished regular season with only 1 loss. But they've done a good job this year not letting that happen. In the past, that's been an issue. James is under 500 against the spread the week after the Ohio State game in his career at Penn State. But this year, that hasn't been the case, right? They came out, they blasted Washington 35-6. The game honestly was not that close. You manhandled a terrible Purdue team. You manhandled a bad Maryland team. And you played what I think is a pretty solid Minnesota team on the road where that thing had all the anatomies of an upset. Special teams, snafus, bounces going Minnesota's way, and you rode it out, you survived. So the 4 games since Ohio State, they're 4-0. The average final score has been 39-12, and that's even with including the 1-point win in Minneapolis. So I think, they're playing some really good football right now. We'll get into this later on. I think the major concern is not necessarily how you're playing, but who might be playing. There's definitely some injury bugs and some injuries that have popped up in recent weeks that are going to impact this game. But overall, I think they are playing really good football right now.
Now, whether you're playing the top team in the country in the Oregon Ducks in the Big Ten championship game, whether you're playing Maryland or Washington or Purdue or Ohio State or whoever you're playing, it seems like Penn State, when they have success, they get 44 in blue and white involved. They get Tyler Warren involved. And now when we start to really dive into this matchups, he is an extremely big key, whether he's running the football, whether he's catching the football. Heck, maybe he even might throw the football, right? We've seen him do that certainly this season within Andy Kotelnicki's offense. How does Penn State kind of work with some of these matchups? Because Oregon's got a really good secondary back there. We'll talk about that more here in just a little bit. But how do you think Andy is going to set up Tyler Warren for success in this game against a really good Oregon defense?
Yeah, what I'm going to be very curious to see is what have they learned from the mistakes against Ohio State? Because a big reason why they lost the Ohio State game was probably that they didn't get Warren enough touches until late in the game. Yeah. And then at the goal line, everybody remembers that goal line stand where Warren, you had 5 plays inside the 3, and Warren was not targeted on any of them. So where do you learn from those mistakes you made against Ohio State and don't let that happen again on Saturday? Because even in the Ohio State game, Tyler Warren still had, between rushing and receiving, 7 touches for 94 yards. It's not like he had a bad day. And now part of it was Ohio State just blanketed him with Caleb Downs, and Caleb Downs might be the best defensive player in all college football. And no knock on Oregon's defense. They don't have a Caleb Downs. But like you said, it's a very good secondary. It's a very good group of linebackers. It's going to be a great matchup to watch. I'm curious to see, how often are we going to see him line up a quarterback and take a snap, and where does it go from there? one thing I'm really watching on Saturday is so many times this year where he has taken that snap at quarterback and then they kind of orbit motion Nick Singleton out into the open. He'll fake that pitch. He has not pitched it yet. And you got to think that plays there. I'll be curious to see if we see that with Tyler Warren on Saturday too, where the defense is so focused on him and you get Nick Singleton with his speed out in the open then. But yeah, I'm going to be very curious to see what they do to get Tyler Warren involved, how they try and force him the ball because his offense revolves around Tyler Warren. And yeah, that's going to be a great matchup to watch on Saturdays. As you mentioned, this is a very good Oregon secondary, a very good defense. And you know that Dan Lanning and his staff are spending all week figuring out how are we going to try and take away Tyler Warren. Because ultimately, nobody has done it yet this year. Even in the Ohio State game, when he was targeted, he made plays. I felt like Penn State didn't target him enough. So no one has taken Tyler Warren away yet this year. So I will be curious to see this because Dan Lanning, obviously one of the best defensive minds in college football, can he find a way to do it?
And I think that's what makes his success so interesting is he is such a huge part to the success of Penn State's offense. Yet, when people target him and people defend him and they shade their defense in his direction, he still finds a way to certainly get a lot of production. Now, if Tyler Warren is going to have a lot of success, Penn State's offensive line is also going to need to have a lot of success. This is an Oregon defensive line that is they're good. They're good. They got two guys up in the top five of the Big Ten in sacks right now. How do you expect kind of this Penn State offensive line to be able to adjust to an Oregon defensive line that is playing some pretty nasty football right now?
Yeah, this might be where the game is won or lost, in my opinion, is Penn State's offensive line against Oregon's defensive line. Penn State's offensive line overall this year has played really well. This is probably their best overall offensive line since at least 2019, which is kind of wild to say you had a top 10 pick of left tackle last year. But as a group, I think they're better this year than they were. Now, this is where some of those injuries come into play. I mentioned your starting right tackle, Anthony Donka, who might be the best overall offensive lineman on the team, out for the year with a knee injury that he suffered against Minnesota. Nolan Rucci, the former five-star recruit who transferred in from Wisconsin before the start of the year, stepped in for him. Rucci, very good run blocker, bet can struggle to bend in pass protection. And then also left guard Vega Ione, who's probably been your second best offensive lineman behind Donka this year. In each of the last two games has kind of been in and out during the game with battling some sort of something. So I think health's going to be important. You're not going to have Donka, but you need Ione to hopefully be as healthy as possible. And I think as a group, they've got to play, the offensive line does, they've got to play the best game they've played all year if they're going to win this thing on Saturday, because this Oregon front seven is tremendous. It's right up there with Ohio State honestly, Penn State's as well for the best front seven in the Big Ten. All three of them, I think, are very, very good. But against Ohio State, the offensive line definitely had some struggles at times. And this Oregon defensive line might be even a little bit better than the Buckeyes. So it's definitely going to be a battle to watch. And like I said, I think it's very possible that's what decides this game. Whoever wins that battle between Penn State's offensive line and Oregon's defensive line, I wouldn't be surprised if you look back after the game and say that's where this game was won or lost.
Well, let's kind of flip to the other side of the trenches. I just love talking about trenches. Naturally, a Big Ten show does, right? Oregon's offensive line, specifically the tackles in pass protection, are fantastic. Johnny Cornelius and Josh Connerly have been protecting Dylan Gabriel certainly a lot this season. And then you look at Penn State, of course. We know about Abdul Carter. We know about Denai Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant. Some of these guys that are on the Penn State defensive line, you got to imagine that the Nittany Lions need to get Dylan Gabriel uncomfortable, but just how big of a challenge is it going up against this unit? We'll see if Marcus Harper is back for this game at guard for Oregon, because you got to think this is going to be a challenge for Penn State to generate pressure. How successful do you think the Nittany Lions can be getting 8 back there a little bit uncomfortable?
Yeah, I mean, they've been successful all year, so you got to do it. You got to bring it again as this defensive line. I mean, early in the year when Oregon was kind of scuffling around a little bit, look where their struggles were. It was that offensive line. Now the group has gotten healthy. They've gelled together. They made the switch at center, and things have gone extremely well since then. But even that Wisconsin game a couple of weeks ago, Wisconsin gave their offensive line some issues. So, I mean, you mentioned it. Abdul Carter is going to be all over the place for Tom Allen in this game on this defense. Denai Dennis Sutton, who tweaked I think it was a hamstring. They never really said, but it looked like a hamstring. He tweaked against Wisconsin. But this past Saturday against Maryland, he looked as explosive and as healthy as he has since before he got hurt. And Zane Durant, I mean, there might not be a more underrated, underappreciated player in the Big Ten than Zane Durant and what he has done this season. So this defensive line is very good. Now, one other thing to watch, again, to go back to injuries, Alonzo Ford, who's probably been their second best defensive tackle behind Durant this year, also lost with a season-ending injury against Minnesota. And I don't think it's not necessarily that you miss Ford himself, which not knocking him because he's had a tremendous year, but you miss that depth piece because you started the year 5 deep at defensive tackle with Durant, with Ford, with Devon J. Thomas, with Kazai Izzard, and with Hakeem Beamon. Well, Beamon stepped away from the team a few weeks ago. Now you have Ford out for the year. So that's just always something to watch where is that something where maybe in the fourth quarter Oregon can expose that depth a little bit and wear those guys down more so than anything else. But I expect this pass rush led by Carter, led by Dennis Sutton, led by Durant to get after Dylan Gabriel. One other name I'm going to mention for fans to watch, number 18, Max Granville. He's a true freshman who has played in his 4 games this year, but with the new rules, postseasons don't count towards your red shirt, so he's good. He's preserved the red shirt. He's got a lot of size he needs to put on, but he is twitchy and extremely explosive off the edge. And I'll be curious to see if in some obvious passing situations you potentially see him and Dennis Sutton as your ends, allowing Carter to kind of just roam around and do whatever. So that will be another name to watch on Saturday. I think number 18, Max Granville, the true freshman, who he's got a big time future at Penn State, but he has, even with his size issues as a true freshman, he's got elite burst and an elite first step. So I'm curious to see if they use him as well when it's very clear Oregon's going to have to throw the ball.
You talked about Dennis Sutton coming back in this Maryland game. One guy who was not available in the Maryland game was Trey Wallace, also known as Harrison Wallace, out there at wide receiver. Now, earlier in the week, James Franklin has said he was not very clear, let's just put it that way, on what the status of Wallace is going to be. I still think now that we're later in the week, still think it's going to be that way. So we'll see what his status will certainly be on Saturday. Regardless, this is a Oregon secondary. We talked about it earlier. That is very, very good. We talked about how they can work things in covering Tyler Warren. It seems to me Penn State's wide receivers needs to have their best game of the season for Penn State to be able to come out on top. How important is it for the Nittany Lions to create some explosive plays down the field with this wide receiver group?
Yeah, it's going to be really important because it's going to be tough. Oregon's not a defense where you can line up and consistently put together 8, 9, 10 play drives and go score. Right. You're going to need some explosiveness. Yeah, you're hoping to get that from Tyler Warren, from Nicholas Singleton, but as we mentioned earlier, Dan Lanning's going to be keying on those guys. Trey, I'm assuming we probably won't know to the ball snapped if Trey's going to play or not, even if he warms up, because he tried to warm up against Maryland, didn't go. It's important because this wide receiver group, it's the one group on the one position on this team that you don't think is at a national championship caliber level is the wide receivers probably. Trey Wallace leads the team among receivers and receptions and yards. It's going to be important for him to play. I think if he doesn't play, they're really going to struggle to move the ball offensively. And whether he plays or not, you mentioning the explosiveness, one guy to watch, a wide receiver that is Omari Evans. Evans has averaged 20 yards a catch this year. He's only got 18 catches, but 4 of them have gone for 45 or more yards. He's also drawn 2 or 3 defensive pass interferences where he's gotten behind the secondary and the safety basically just tackled him to prevent the 60-yard touchdown. So in the last few weeks, they've been trying to use that more once or twice a game, that deep ball to Evans. So I'll be curious if we see that on Saturday as well. But yeah, I think Trey Wallace, if Penn State's going to win, they need Trey Wallace to play, and they need this wide receiver group to play the best game they have all year. In my opinion, the best game they've played as a group was against USC. And again, that was a situation where they had to, because in the second half, you're down by 2 scores. You had to throw the ball and push it down the field. And to their credit, they stepped up and made plays. Can they do it again on Saturday? I think another guy potentially to watch is Julian Fleming, the Ohio State transfer. He's only got 14 catches this year, but they've been important catches, including 2 on 4th down on that final drive against USC. And I also think Fleming having that big game experience could be important, right? He's played in the Big Ten championship game. That Sugar Bowl against Georgia, where Ohio State probably should have won. Yep. Fleming had something like 8 catches for 130 yards. So he's kind of shown the knack, even though he hasn't probably had the career he'd hoped for as a former 5-star recruit. He's kind of shown the knack in big moments to come up big, both with Ohio State and with Penn State. So I think that could be something to watch on Saturday too, because sometimes you have those guys who, those big moments, that's when they might not always be consistent, but they shine their brightest when it matters most. And I'll be curious to see if Fleming can maybe help with that on Saturday.
You mentioned the career of Fleming, and you mentioned the 14 catches this year. Hey, maybe he hasn't been that top type of target with the number of catches that Penn State expected him to be. But, sometimes players like that come up big in these types of atmospheres and this types of games. All right, I'll get you out of here with this. If Penn State is going to knock off the number 1 team in Oregon, if they're going to be the number 1 seed in the college football playoff, if they're going to win the Big Ten championship, what's one battle that they absolutely need to win?
Like I mentioned earlier, I think it's the offensive line. Their offensive line's got to win more often than not against Oregon's defensive line. I mean, I know maybe it's a bit of a cop-out to say that, the football game is going to be one of the trenches because it usually is. But I think that's how it goes. And I think their offensive line against Oregon's D-line is going to be more important than their D-line against Oregon's O-line. Because I expect Penn State's defensive line to make plays because they've done it all year. You've got at least 3 or 4 future NFL guys there, maybe even 2 first-round picks in Carter and Dennis Sutton. They're going to get theirs. This offensive line has to come out and play their best game of the year. I think if the offensive line comes out and plays their best game of the year, there's a good shot that Saturday night you're sitting here watching Penn State celebrate their first Big Ten championship since 2016.
Marty Leap, Happy Valley Insider of the Rivals Network. Great to talk to you, and thanks for coming on and giving us an insider's look at Penn State prior to this big game.
Absolutely. It should be a great game on Saturday. I truly believe this is 2 of the 4 or 5 best teams in the country, so I think this is going to be a great game Saturday night regardless.
Thanks to Marty for joining us here today. Thanks also to Justin Hopkins from Scoop Duck at On 3. There's only one thing left to do. That's play the football game. Leave all your thoughts in the comments below. Final thoughts in the comments below. Who you think's winning? What's your score prediction? All of that. It's going to be a great time in Indianapolis. I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching Big Ten Ted, where it's all Big Ten all year long. Make sure to like the video to spread the word of Big Ten Ted to the masses, and subscribe to the channel for updates on Big Ten content that drops every day.